That's the option I have is no handers. Because I won one, I lost the other, and it's good match for making everywhere. Because I think the fans like to someone great classic with two good name.
Wanderlei Silva, the axe murderer, was the embodiment of the price of glory in mixed martial arts, a sport that thrives on raw intensity and brutal spectacle. In the hallowed rings of Japan's Pride Fighting Championships, he was more than a fighter. He was a force of nature, a terrifying figure whose wild eyes and relentless onslaughts left opponents shattered and audiences spellbound. His style was chaos incarnate, swinging fists, crushing knees, and a fearless disregard for his own safety. Fans across the globe worshipped his violence, chanting his name as he dismantled legends and soaked the canvas in blood. But beneath the roars of the crowd, few paused to consider the cost of his ferocity. Behind every knockout, every brutal finish, a man was slowly unraveling, his body and mind paying a silent toll. Now, decades later, Silva is no longer the feared icon who ruled the sport. He is a forgotten figure, isolated, grappling with the devastating effects of brain trauma. This is not a tale of redemption or comeback. It is a tragic saga of a warrior who poured his soul into the cage and lost himself to the very violence that made him a legend. Born in the gritty streets of Curitiba, Brazil, Wanderlei Silva grew up in a world where survival was a daily battle, not a poetic metaphor. His neighborhood was unforgiving, a place where weakness invited danger, and strength was the only currency that mattered. For young Silva, violence was not just a means of protection. It became a core part of his identity, a way to assert his existence in a chaotic world. As a child, he found himself in street fights, not out of pride or ego, but because something inside him came alive in those moments of conflict. It was not anger that drove him, but a primal need to feel something real, something undeniable. His parents, desperate to channel this restless energy, enrolled him in martial arts classes, hoping to impose discipline on their wild son. But instead of taming him, the training ignited a fire. He dove into Muay Thai and Vale Tudo, brutal combat disciplines designed not for sport, but for absolute domination. In the dim, sweat-drenched gyms of Curitiba, under flickering fluorescent lights, Silva discovered his true self, a predator honed for destruction. At the Shoot Box Academy, a legendary training ground known for forging fighters with a killer's instinct, Silva was a standout. The gym did not produce polished athletes. It crafted warriors who walked into fights with the intent to annihilate. Silva was their masterpiece. Coaches saw it immediately. He was not just aggressive, he relished the pain. In sparring, he grinned when struck, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing joy. He attacked training pads with ferocity, moved through drills with savage precision, and pushed himself to the edge of exhaustion, as if possessed by something beyond mere ambition. Other fighters tried to mimic the shoot box style, aggressive, relentless, unyielding, but Silva embodied it in a way that felt almost supernatural. His early professional bouts in Brazil were raw, chaotic displays of violence. He fought like a caged animal finally set free, with no patience for strategy, no hesitation, just an unrelenting storm of fists and knees. Fans began calling him Cachorro Louco, the Mad Dog, a nickname that captured his wild, untamed spirit. But it was in Japan, where violence was not just accepted, but celebrated as an art form, that Silva's ferocity would find its ultimate stage. When Wanderlei Silva stepped into a pride ring for the first time, he was a vision of menace. His shaved head, cold, unblinking stare, and muscled neck gave him the look of a pit bull ready to strike. He did not dance or play to the crowd. he stalked forward with a singular purpose. Pride's rules were tailor-made for his brutality, allowing soccer kicks and knees to the head of a downed opponent, moves that were not just permitted, but encouraged. Silva thrived in this environment, embarking on an 18-fight unbeaten streak, one of the most dominant runs in MMA history. He captured the Pride Middleweight Grand Prix and held the Pride Middleweight Championship for 5 years, a reign that cemented his legacy. But statistics only tell part of the story. Silva did not just win fights, he obliterated his opponents, breaking their bodies and their will. He hunted down legends like Kazushi Sakuraba and Yuki Kondo, treating them like prey, absorbing their best shots and returning devastation. He was not a technical fighter, not a chess player in the ring. He was a storm, unpredictable and unstoppable. Japanese fans, known for their reserved demeanor, erupted when he entered the arena. He became a national icon, not because he spoke their language, but because he spoke the universal language of destruction. Pride's theatrical production amplified his myth. Pounding music, flashing lights, and dramatic entrances that announced the arrival of a destroyer. For a time, it seemed Silva could never be defeated. But beneath the invincible persona, the relentless punishment he absorbed was quietly eroding something fragile: his own humanity. Silva's legacy was written in blood, and not just that of his opponents. His victories were not clean knockouts or swift submissions. They were grueling, savage wars where the line between victory and destruction was razor-thin. His trilogy with Kazushi Sakuraba remains a cornerstone of MMA lore in Japan. Silva did not just defeat Sakuraba, he dismantled him, fracturing his orbital bones and leaving him unconscious in multiple encounters. But those brutal exchanges came at a cost. Sakuraba, a warrior in his own right, landed punishing blows, and each head kick, each flurry of strikes, left invisible scars on Silva's brain. His battles with Rampage Jackson were equally ferocious, particularly their second fight, a clash that saw both men trade devastating blows. In 2007, Dan Henderson delivered a crushing knockout with a spinning back fist and follow-up hammer fists, dropping Silva face-first to the canvas and ending his Pride title reign. That loss stripped away more than a championship. It shattered the aura of invincibility that had defined him. The signs of damage began to surface. In interviews, his speech grew slightly slurred, his sentences repetitive. He forgot dates, names, moments. Fans noticed, commentators whispered about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, and coaches urged him to adopt a safer style. But Silva was built for war, not caution. His only gear was forward, and each fight chipped away at him. Slower reflexes, foggy days in the gym, moments of confusion that crept in uninvited. The axe murderer remained in name, but the man behind the moniker was bleeding out in silence. Pride was Silva's kingdom, a world where the rules, the crowd, and the culture amplified his destructive genius. But in 2007, Pride collapsed under the weight of scandal and financial ruin, absorbed by the UFC. Overnight, Silva's empire vanished. In Japan, he was a warrior poet, revered for his violence. In the UFC, he was just another name on a crowded roster. The transition was jarring. Gone were the soccer kicks, the stomps, the theatrical entrances. The UFC's stricter rules, clinical venues, and American audiences did not understand the myth of the man who had ruled Pride. His 2007 UFC debut against Chuck Liddell, another fading legend, was billed as a clash of titans. The fight was a bloody, thrilling war, earning Fight of the Night honors, but Silva lost by unanimous decision. The deeper loss was the realization that his speed, his pressure, his fear factor were slipping away. The sport had evolved, but Silva remained tethered to his reckless style. His trilogy fight with Rampage Jackson in the UFC was meant to settle their rivalry. Instead, a brutal left hook knocked him out cold in the first round, erasing any lingering belief that Pride's king could rule the UFC's octagon. A gritty 2010 victory over Michael Bisping offered a fleeting glimpse of his old fire, but the losses piled up. Chris Lieben stopped him in just 27 seconds. Rich Franklin outboxed him. His aggression, once his greatest weapon, now exposed him to punishment. Younger fans, unaware of his Pride legacy, saw him as a reckless brawler with no defense. Commentators and UFC president Dana White openly suggested retirement, but Silva's stubbornness, the same trait that made him a legend, pushed him toward a darker path. By 2014, Silva's body was a battlefield of its own. His knees were shot, his back stiff, his memory increasingly unreliable. Yet he yearned for one more moment in the spotlight, signing on to face Chael Sonnen at UFC 175. But that fight never happened. In May 2014, the Nevada State Athletic Commission arrived at his gym for a random drug test. Silva, citing diuretics and anti-inflammatories for injury management, fled the building rather than comply. The consequences were swift and severe. A lifetime ban from the NSAC, a ruling unprecedented for mere evasion, not a failed test. Dana White publicly blasted him, accusing him of cowardice and deceit. The UFC severed ties, and Silva, the axe murderer, was cast out, not with a dramatic knockout, but with a cloud of shame. He fought back the only way he knew how, with his voice. On YouTube and social media, he unleashed a torrent of videos accusing the UFC of corruption, underpaying fighters, and discarding legends like trash. He pointed to double standards and exposed the sport's underbelly. Some fans rallied behind him, seeing truth in his words, but others saw only a broken man lashing out in pain. The UFC barely acknowledged him, moving on to new stars and bigger pay-per-views. The ban was eventually overturned, but the damage was irreparable. Sponsors vanished, media coverage dwindled, and Silva, once a global icon, became a cautionary tale. A pioneer who defied the system and paid the ultimate price. Exiled from the UFC, Silva refused to fade quietly. He turned to the internet, pouring out years of frustration as a loyal company man. His videos were unfiltered, a raw outpouring of anger and betrayal. He accused the UFC of rigging fights, manipulating judges, and running the sport like a cartel. He called out Dana White for exploiting fighters and discarding legends. Some claims carried weight. Fighter pay was notoriously low, and backroom deals were an open secret. But his delivery was chaotic, his thoughts disjointed, his logic often lost in venom. In 2016, he took a bold step, filing a lawsuit against the UFC and its parent company, Zuffa, for anti-competitive practices. It was a move no other legend had dared, but the case faltered, dismissed with little media attention. To the world, Silva looked like a bitter ex-fighter, shouting into the void. His public appearances grew rare, his star power dimmed. In Brazil, fans still revered him. In Japan, old Pride clips kept his legend alive. But globally, he was an enigma, half hero, half outcast. He tried fighting in other promotions like Rizin and Bellator, but the spark was gone. His movements were slower, his ferocity dulled. The truth, too painful to voice, was undeniable. The years of head trauma were taking a permanent toll, and the chaos that once defined him now lived inside his mind. By the late 2010s, the signs were unmistakable. Wanderlei Silva, once the snarling face of pride, was a shadow of his former self. His speech was sluggish, his thoughts fragmented. He forgot names, paused mid-sentence, lost in a mental fog. In a 2019 interview, he confirmed what many feared. Memory loss was consuming him. He could not recall entire conversations, forgot where he parked his car, and lived with a constant sense of disorientation. "It's like a fog over me," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. Doctors suspected chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma, seen in NFL players and boxers. Silva had over 20 documented concussions from his MMA career, but he believed the true number was closer to 100. "I don't remember half of my fights," he admitted. "The videos are all I have." It was a haunting confession from a man whose life was defined by his physical dominance. His weapons, his fists, his knees, his unyielding head had turned against him. CTE offered no cure, no fight to win, no corner advice to pull him through. In another interview, his voice broke as he spoke of regret. "I wish I could tell that young fighter to fight smarter, to protect himself." But that young fighter, the one who charged into battle for the crowd's roar, was still alive in his mind, even as the man himself faded with each passing day. Today, Wanderlei Silva exists on the fringes of the sport he once ruled. He makes occasional appearances at small MMA events in Brazil, posing for photos, offering a faint wave to the crowd, then retreating backstage. The wild, wide-eyed snarl that once sent shivers through arenas has softened into something quieter, almost hollow. The UFC does not acknowledge him in its legacy discussions, omitting him from Hall of Fame ballots and highlight reels. There is no documentary, no redemption arc, only fan-made YouTube clips and obscure podcasts that reminisce, "Remember when Silva was terrifying?" Behind the curated social media posts and forced smiles, the reality is heartbreaking. Friends say he has become increasingly isolated, struggling to hold long conversations, zoning out mid-sentence. Loud noises startle him. Bright lights trigger dizziness and headaches, forcing him to wear sunglasses indoors. His family has grown protective, limiting his public outings, keeping him close to home. He still trains lightly, lifts weights, maintains the look of a fighter, but the war machine that once tore through opponents is gone. In its place is a man with a fractured memory, carrying the weight of a legendary past through a world he once dominated with ease. In a 2020 podcast, when asked about his daily life, Silva paused for a long moment before answering, "I try to hold on to what I'm doing." He chuckled, but the hosts did not laugh, the pain in his words too raw to ignore. Silva is more than a collection of highlight reel knockouts. He is a man haunted by lost memories, broken trust, and irreversible damage. In a sport that races toward the next big star, his silence is deafening. He walks slowly now, speaks cautiously, but when someone mentions pride, he smiles, his eyes distant, not remembering, but reaching for a past that slips further away. What does a fighter leave behind when the cheers fade? For Silva, it is not just a legacy of devastation, but a trail of shattered bones, scarred opponents, and the echoes of a man who never took a step back. He fought like a gladiator, fearless, frenzied, for the crowd's adoration, no matter the cost. That cost is staggering. His name occasionally trends when an old highlight surfaces or a rivalry is revisited, but those clicks are ghosts. They do not reflect the man sitting in his quiet home, struggling to recall what he ate for breakfast. They do not capture the migraines, the disorientation, the mood swings, the sleepless nights. or the family who worries if he is safe alone. Silva was not merely a victim of MMA, he was its purest expression. Raw, primal, terrifying. The sport gave him everything: fame, glory, adoration, and then took it all back. New fighters, learning from his reckless abandon, choose smarter paths, prioritizing longevity over carnage. But Silva could not. He bled for every fight in real time, his body and mind paying the price for each roar of the crowd. There will never be another axe murderer, and perhaps that is for the best. His style was not just unsustainable, it was self-destructive. Fans called it legendary. Doctors call it trauma. Today, Wanderlei Silva lingers in a quiet corner of MMA history, not erased, not celebrated, but filed away like a warning. A myth? A man whose brain still pays for the cheers we gave him. He gave us everything, and it cost him everything.